9/11, 2001. Terrorists who call themselves warriors of God against the Crusaders of the West. Two religions that demand peace, yet wage war throughout history. Epochs of confrontation and collaboration. Peoples and powers who fight in the name of God, but who struggle for supremacy on earth. It's the 19th century. Europeans control the Islamic world, but the Muslims are fighting for their freedom. The German emperor wants to make use of it. Kaiser Wilhelm II seeks a First World War alliance with the Turkish Sultan. Together, they plan to unleash a jihad against the British and other enemies. A holy war for Allah and for the Kaiser. Jerusalem, a holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. A city worshipped and bitterly disputed for centuries. In the Middle Ages, Christian emperors and Islamic rulers fought bloody battles over the control of its holy sites. After the Crusades, Jerusalem remained part of the Islamic world. On the 29th of October, 1898, the whole city is on its feet. The people are out to welcome a prominent visitor. For the first time in 670 years, a Christian monarch has come to visit Jerusalem. Kaiser Wilhelm II. He's here as a friend of the Muslims, not as a crusader. The German emperor is popular in the Middle East. Unlike the British and French, he has not conquered parts of the Islamic world. He is in Jerusalem for the official opening of the newly built Church of the Redeemer. The emperor, who is also the head of the Lutheran Church of Prussia, had personally called for its construction. But it's the Muslim people themselves who leave the greatest impression. The emperor is enthralled and lets the Muslim world and its people work their magic. The Kaiser says that if he wasn't Christian, he'd be a Muslim. Wilhelm II's visit is politically sensitive. At the end of the 19th century, many Muslims are eager to counter European supremacy. Holy warriors challenge the most powerful empire of the time, the British Empire. In British-controlled Sudan and Egypt, a poorly equipped army of farmers and shepherds leaves behind a trail of blood.
The rebellion was definitely couched in Islamist terms, specifically as a kind of modest millenarian revolt against European infidels.
The rebels reached the district capital of Khartoum, the seat of the British governor of the Upper Nile. They follow their charismatic leader, Muhammad Ahmad, without question. They believe he has been sent by Allah to liberate the country.
Allahu Akbar!
Muhammad Ahmad of Dongola province declared himself the Mahdi, which is to say the rightly guided one, a kind of prophet to usher in the end times for Islam.
Khartoum falls on the 26th of January, 1885. A traitor opens the city gates. The rebels create a bloodbath among the defenders. The Mahdist War becomes the first successful rebellion against a colonial power in Africa, a revolt in the name of Allah.
The rebellion was obviously seen as a serious threat to British imperial authority. There was also a strategic dimension, which was, of course, that the British Empire in particular ruled over many millions of Muslim subjects.
At the end of the 19th century, 100 million Muslims, a third of the world's Muslim population, live in the British Empire. It's the biggest empire that ever existed. If the Mahdist revolt spreads, the imperial giant will be in serious danger. London is determined to set an example. But it's not until 1898, 18 years after the outbreak of fighting, that the British Army is able to stop a rebel force at Omdurman in Sudan. They are armed with a devastating new weapon, the machine gun. Fire! 10,000 Muslim fighters are killed in just 5 hours. The British lose 500. The slaughter ends the revolt of the Holy Warriors. Although the British Empire defeats the Mahdist rebellion, the episode shows what kind of forces can be unleashed in the name of Allah. The death-defying army of the Mahdi shocks the British. What would happen to the British Empire if these warriors of God had access to modern weapons?
The British and French clearly feared a jihad at the start of the 20th century. They were aware that their dominance in the Muslim world would pose a threat if Muslims were prepared to rebel. And this fear is clearly expressed in the publications of the time.
But increasingly, the British also consider the German emperor a threat, Kaiser Wilhelm II. The German Empire has become a powerful competitor, militarily and economically. In just 2 decades, German industry has surpassed the British. The ambitious German emperor even wants to challenge the British in their very own domain, at sea. He commissions the construction of a naval fleet to match the strength of the Royal Navy. Then, Wilhelm II increases the tension further still. In his race for influence and market dominance, the Kaiser places a new bet: the Islamic world. A few weeks after the British defeat of the rebels in Sudan, Wilhelm II embarks on a spectacular journey. It takes him to the court of the Sultan of Constantinople. Abdulhamid II knows that the Europeans, especially Britain and Russia, are just waiting to pick at his crumbling empire. The powerful man from Germany arrives at the right time. He's a trustworthy partner because he has no territorial desires in the Middle East.
Ich erbiete dem Sultan und Kalifen meinen Gruß.
Seid willkommen. Der Besuch des deutschen Kaisers ist für mich und das osmanische Volk
The Sultan and the Ottomans regard the Kaiser's visit as a great honor. He's brought gifts, including a modern rifle of German manufacture.
Wir werden unser gesamtes Heer damit ausstatten. Ich zeige es euch. Ein Mausergewehr, ein
The new Mauser rifle allows a skilled soldier to fire 15 rounds per minute.
Und Präzisionsarbeit. Wenn ich eure
A
Aufmerksamkeit auf
symbolic
einen
gift,
besonderen Umstand
as the Kaiser wants a military alliance with the Sultan.
Dieses Magazin fasst 5 Patronen. Der Verschluss ist eine neue.
For some time, the German military has been helping to modernize the Ottoman army.
Auf wen oder was überlasse ich euch.
The Sultan rules over a huge empire that includes the holy sites of Medina, Mecca, and Jerusalem. But his empire has suffered numerous state bankruptcies. There's talk in Europe of the sick man on the Bosporus. Not only the governments of Europe hope to profit from the weakness of this former world power. The Jewish journalist Theodor Herzl also sees an opportunity. Herzl represents the movement of the Zionists. It's their ambition to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. In his book, The Jewish State, Herzl explains why the Jewish people desire their own homeland. He follows Kaiser Wilhelm II through the Middle East. He hopes the monarch will support his plan. Near Jerusalem, there may be an opportunity for a face-to-face meeting.
Der Kaiser ist bereit, Sie zu empfangen.
Herzl's in luck, as Kaiser Wilhelm grants him an audience.
Herzl. Setzen Sie sich. Ist das nicht ein herrlicher Anblick?
Wem sagen Sie das?
The Jewish journalist complains that the Jews are being ostracized and persecuted in Europe, and that they are barred from the upper echelons of society.
Steht bis heute verwehrt.
A Jewish state in Palestine would give the Jews the freedoms they've been lacking.
Könnten wir einen eigenen Staat aufbauen und unser Volk könnte sich frei entfalten.
Mein guter Herzl, ich verstehe Sie ja.
The Kaiser understands Herzl's dream for a Jewish home state in Palestine, but it will take time to achieve his goal.
Wir müssen sehr vorsichtig mit dem Sultan umgehen.
Herzl hoped, that is, to use the Kaiser's influence in the Ottoman Empire with Sultan Abdulhamid II. The ultimate decision was that of the Sultan, not the Kaiser, and he essentially chose not to endorse Herzl's project.
For the Kaiser, a Jewish state is of secondary importance. He's decided to give his support to the Sultan. His journey continues to Damascus. At a festive reception in the palace of the Turkish governor, Kaiser Wilhelm II utters words that will make international headlines.
Möge der Sultan und möge
Wilhelm assures the Sultan that the Kaiser will always be a friend of the world's 300 million Muslims.
zu allen Zeiten der deutsche Kaiser ihr Freund sein wird.
So the Kaiser was, in a sense, almost interfering in the affairs of these rival powers, making a claim, that is, that Germany had a preferential or proprietary interest in the affairs of these Muslims, could not help but excite the fears and anxieties of these other powers.
It comes to represent Germany's presence in the Middle East, a grand railway line, the Baghdad Railway. The German press celebrates its construction inside the Ottoman Empire as a world-class act. 1,200 miles long, it runs across mountains and through scorching deserts. It is the German Empire's biggest foreign investment. Its financial backers are guaranteed income from rail transportation and the rights to drill for oil within 12 miles of either side of the line for the next 99 years. The line creates a link between Constantinople and Baghdad. A second line goes south via Damascus to Medina. But the thought that the Kaisers railway might one day be carrying German weapons to the Egyptian border causes concern in London. The British Empire's main artery, the Suez Canal, runs right through British-controlled Egypt. It's vital for reducing the sea route to India. In Cairo, during these years of intense German-British rivalry, a man from Cologne, barely 40 years old, becomes the talking point. His name is Max von Oppenheim. He's the descendant of a well-known banking dynasty and has enough money to fully devote himself to his passion, Oriental culture. He owns a house in the old city of Cairo and speaks fluent Arabic. The son of a Jewish family, he is a converted Catholic. Oppenheim also likes to fulfill his erotic desires. He enters into temporary marriages with young locals, a practice allowed by Islamic law.
Ah, Abdullah. Schon zurück? Ich sehe, Sie sind fündig geworden.
Sie untertreiben, mein
Oppenheim has asked his servant to look for a woman to his liking, who will share his bed.
Schöner als der Mond, wie der Dichter sagt. Das ist kein Mädchen, Herr, das ist ein Juwel.
Sie ist kein Juwel, sie ist ein Kronjuwel. Wie heißt du, mein Engel?
Jamila.
Jamila, die Schöne.
The young woman won't be the only one. In his memoirs, Oppenheim boasts that none of his temporary wives ever rejected him, even though they had the right to do so, and that the best way to learn Arabic was in bed. But this passionate admirer of the Middle East is also a German patriot. He has first-hand knowledge of the Muslim world and offers his services to his government. In 1896, Oppenheim secures a position with the German Foreign Office in Cairo. His job is described as systematic observer of the Islamic world.
Ein heißer Tag heute. Gibt es irgendwelche Neuigkeiten? Schon gehört?
Oppenheim collects information on the Egyptian resistance against the British occupation. He sends regular reports to Berlin. The British in Cairo soon call him the Kaisers' spy.
Wichtigkeit für uns.
Die Engländer werden langsam misstrauisch.
Sollen sie. Was schert es uns?
The two powers, the British and German empires, also compete in the field of science. Oppenheim participates in an archaeological race to discover ancient sites. He excavates a 3,000-year-old palace, which he finds purely by chance. In 1912, Oppenheim visits a group of British archaeologists who are working on a dig a few days from Cairo. Until this point, the Germans had only ever interpreted other people's discoveries. Now, they're in the desert themselves, in competition with the British. Oppenheim meets a young and gaunt archaeologist called Thomas Edward Lawrence. As a 21-year-old, the talented Oxford graduate has traveled the Middle East on his own initiative. He is a like-minded enthusiast.
Das ist die interessanteste und wichtigste Ausgrabung, die ich jemals gesehen habe. Mein lieber Lawrence.
With a touch of irony, Lawrence later describes his meeting with the Baron from Cologne, who was 30 years his senior. But he has respect for him, both as archaeologist and as author of an admirable book on the Bedouins. Both are fascinated by the Orient and have chosen careers that allow them to live in Arabia. The two men cannot foresee that they will soon be sworn enemies, and that they will both try to win the war in the Middle East for their respective nations. In August 1914, the First World War breaks out. The Kaiser has isolated Germany and Europe. France, Britain, and Russia have formed an alliance against the German Empire. Despite this, a sense of confidence remains.
The enemy has attacked us at a time of peace. We must take up arms. Any indecision or hesitation would be a betrayal of the fatherland.
The Germans devised the Schlieffen Plan. Its aim is to defeat the French quickly and then concentrate on the fight against Russia. But at the Battle of the Marne, the German advance grinds to a halt. After only a few weeks, the army gets stuck in the trenches. Even the optimists in the army's high command realize that this will be a long and protracted war, and that it could easily exhaust Germany's resources. But the Kaiser is convinced that he has another ace to play. Wilhelm regards the English as a nation of unscrupulous shopkeepers. He will encourage the Muslim world to rebel against Britain.
The German Empire was not prepared for the war on two fronts that it was now facing. But the Germans thought they saw a way out by opening up a third front in the Middle East, meaning they hoped to win the war with the help of millions of Muslims.
Max von Oppenheim shares the Kaiser's view. Working directly for the Foreign Office in Berlin, he drafts a strategy paper that is based on his long-held beliefs.
Absatz. In erster Linie haben wir gegenwärtig.
He writes, "First and foremost, we have to think about strengthening the forces of Islam and about how to use them for our self-defense. The perfidiousness of our enemies entitles us to use whatever means are available."
Die Perfidie unserer Gegner gibt uns zudem das Recht, zu jedem Mittel zu greifen.
Oppenheim's concept: if the Muslims rebel in the colonies, Britain and France will be forced to redeploy troops from the European front.
Für England ein furchtbarer Schlag. Tun wir alles.
Islam's intervention in the current war would be a terrible blow for the English. Let's do whatever we can to ensure that this blow will be fatal.
Zeichen.
Oppenheim's paper, The Revolutionization of Our Enemies' Islamic Colonies, speaks of a global Muslim revolt. If the Sultan of Constantinople declared a jihad, Muslims from India to Morocco would follow. They would have to assassinate enemy politicians, smuggle weapons to India, set fire to the oil fields of Baku and Azerbaijan, and lay mines in the Suez Canal. Oppenheim knows that a holy war will be very expensive. His paper is given to the Kaiser in October 1914. Oppenheim is ordered to establish a dedicated agency to run the holy war from Berlin. For For the plan to work, the Turks will have to cooperate. But in Constantinople, army generals have seized power in a coup. The leader is the 33-year-old Enver Pasha. The Sultan, Mehmed Reshad, is a political puppet. In November 1914, Enver officially announces an alliance with Germany. The same day, the Sultan declares a jihad. It's a first triumph for the strategic planners in Berlin.
Danke.
Oppenheim is able to announce that the Sultan has declared a jihad. The Ottoman leader has told his soldiers to attack their enemies like lions. May Allah bless their swords, and may the English be damned.
Möge Allah euren Kampf segnen und eure Schwerter schaffen.
Bravo! 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 Bravo!
Jetzt wehe euch, ihr Engländer!
Man spricht beim Jihad.
The Jihad of 1914 is also known as Jihad made in Germany. Islamic law had to be adapted to meet the special demands of the German Empire. What makes this jihad so special is that it was remotely controlled.
War ferngesteuert.
Unsere Aktivitäten sind mittlerweile weltumspannend.
And the German official in charge sets everything in motion to start a worldwide Muslim revolt.
Wir haben eine Expedition nach Afghanistan.
A German expedition is dispatched to Afghanistan to convince the country's Muslim leader to wage war against British India.
Was haben wir am Hindukusch verloren?
Oppenheim's plans for a Muslim uprising have a global dimension. Germany's Weltpolitik includes warfare against the British at the Hindu Kush.
The second dimension of the jihad strategy targets India. It was hoped that the Indian Muslims would rise against their colonial masters. Yet India was firmly under British control, and the Muslims were in any case a minority in the country.
German agents are on their way to encourage the ruler of Afghanistan to wage war against British India. There are plans to block the Suez Canal by scuttling a merchant vessel. German submarines deliver arms and ammunition to the Senussi rebels in Libya. Persia, too, is part of the German jihad strategy. It's already a major source of oil, the lifeblood of the industrial nations. As early as World War I, most British battleships are powered by oil. It's the reason why Britain has brought southern Persia under its control. The pipeline of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company stretches hundreds of miles through the desert. It's a prime target for sabotage. A colorful gang including German officers, Turkish soldiers, and locals opposed to British rule blow up the pipeline along a 12-mile stretch. According to British estimates, 300 million liters of oil are lost. By 1915, more than 60 people work at Berlin's Jihad Agency, including Muslims from around the world. They produce pamphlets to entice rebellion in the Muslim world.
Das kommt eben aus der Druckerei.
Gut. Sehr gut.
Oppenheim even publishes a paper that is titled Jihad. He explains his own understanding of the Holy War.
Oppenheim's conception of it, which was then spread by the German Foreign Office and its agents, was a specifically targeted holy war against the members of the Entente powers and their colonies, particularly targeting civilians. This was an original contribution, one might say, to the doctrine of jihad.
Muslim prisoners of war are to be trained to commit acts of terrorism and sabotage against civilian installations. Oppenheim houses them in a camp close to Berlin that includes a mosque, so they can be indoctrinated by Ottoman clergy. But it's impossible to trigger a holy war from Berlin alone. Oppenheim travels to Constantinople to meet a man with great authority in the Muslim world. He will play a key role in Oppenheim's plan. He is Faisal, the son of the Sharif of Mecca.
Salam alaikum.
Faisal comes from one of the most influential Arab families. They rule the holy sites of Mecca and Medina and have enormous clout in the Muslim world.
Einen riesigen Einfluss in der arabischen Welt besaßen.
Aber wenn es uns gelingt, in Indien und in Ägypten
Oppenheim hopes for popular uprisings against the British in India and Egypt. He wants Faisal to support the Ottoman Sultan's call for a jihad. Soon, Faisal's Muslim brothers would be taking up arms.
wäre das ein entscheidender Schritt. Ich bin sicher, dann würden eure Glaubensbrüder schon bald zu den Waffen greifen.
Bitte nehmen Sie doch Platz.
Danke.
Ich wäre kein guter Muslim.
Faisal refuses to allow Muslims armed only with swords to fight against British machine guns. There'd be terrible losses, but it would be very different if Oppenheim supplied money and modern weapons. But Oppenheim is unaware that this powerful family from Mecca is playing a double game. Faisal's father, Sharif Hussein, is in contact with the British.
Darüber lässt sich reden. Mit der Bahn-
Oppenheim suggests that the Germans could supply artillery by railway. Sharif Hussein, a man who claims to be a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, secretly dreams of re-establishing the Prophet's realm in Mecca. Also in secret, Hussein is in contact with British officials in Egypt. Since the start of the war, an old acquaintance of Oppenheim's has been working here for the British Secret Services, Thomas Edward Lawrence.
Uli, hören Sie sich das an.
London has assured Sharif Hussein in writing that Britain will recognize the independence of Arabia.
Großbritannien ist bereit, die Unabhängigkeit der Araber anzuerkennen. Na wunderbar.
It's a promise made under the pressure of war. The British need allies against the Turks, as their Arab office in Cairo is well aware. Whether they will really hand over territories snatched from the Turks is another matter.
Und noch haben wir den Kuchen nicht. Aber Sie als
Lawrence is ordered to deal with the Arab uprising. He and Oppenheim are now direct opponents in the struggle for the future of Arabia.
Und nehmen Sie einen Koffer Geld mit. Hm?
The British plan works. In the summer of 1916, enticed by the promise of future independence, Hussein officially turns against the Sultan of Constantinople. Arab fighters destroy the Turkish garrison in Mecca, but they stop short of further military action. Hussein and his son Faisal want to unify the Arab regions of the Ottoman Empire. They also plan to expel the Turks, who they have long considered to be foreign rulers. Lawrence is sent to the Arabian Peninsula to make contact with the rebel forces and to reinvigorate the uprising with Faisal's help. It's the start of a career that will make him world famous. In the desert, he meets a man who, a year ago, had cooperated with Oppenheim.
Nun, eure Waffen sind gut. Aber ohne Geld werden die Beduinen
London
Scheichs
has given Lawrence all the authority he needs to make him a more attractive partner in the eyes of the Sheikh. He can offer weapons, military advisors, and money.
Und für Geld.
Wie viel?
Pfund Sterling. Jeden Monat, solange der Krieg dauert.
The British are prepared to fund the Arab uprising.
Das ist viel Geld.
£200,000 per month to mobilize Faisal and his Bedouin warriors against Turks and Germans.
Sie ist unbezahlbar.
Wenn es dann hart auf hart kommt, sind andere Interessen.
When it comes to the crunch, religion is less important than other interests. The same applied during the First World War. The Arab elites were most concerned with the question of independence, a political question that weighs heavier on the soul than the salvation of your soul in paradise.
Das Seelenheil in einem Paradies.
Freedom and money are more important than the Kaisers' holy war. The Arabs do go to war, but in support of the British and against the Turks and Germans. Lawrence knows that in an open battle, his Bedouin fighters are weaker than the Turks. The Bedouins' strength lies in guerrilla warfare. The weakest link in the Turkish defense is the German-built railway. It's ideal for an attack. The Bedouins, who can survive in the desert, are able to attack out of nowhere and then disappear again into the distance. Lawrence perfects these tactics of pin-prick attacks, disrupting the Turkish supply lines. By the end of 1916, all Ottoman forces are in retreat. From Egypt, a British expeditionary force pushes northwards. In December 1917, the British reach Jerusalem. The Sultan's troops and their German commander clear their positions without resistance. On the 9th of December, the victors march through the alleyways of the Holy City. Lawrence celebrates the victory over the Turks and Germans, but he knows that the Arabs' jubilation is premature.
Ist das nicht herrlich? Ein großer Tag für das Empire.
Lawrence has been told that the dream of Arab independence will not come to fruition.
Jedenfalls glauben sie das.
The
Germans have too little money and too few soldiers and personnel, appropriate personnel, to implement their strategy on the ground. But it's different for the British. They seem to have infinite amounts of money, and they have no problem promising the Arabs independence when they have no intention of honoring their promise.
Oppenheim is forced to admit failure.
Ich dachte, ich hätte den Arabern ein Ziel gegeben, für das es...
He thought he'd given the Arabs a goal that was worth fighting for. But he realizes that the British had a much smarter strategy.
Kämen die Unabhängigkeit geschenkt.
Sie werden schon bald merken, dass sie getäuscht werden.
Some still hope for victory, but Oppenheim realizes that the war on the battlefield has been lost. Jihad made in Germany was little more than a pipe dream.
Wir sind völlig am Ende. Ausgeblutet. Das Spiel ist aus.
Die Dschihad-Strategie des Deutschen Reiches scheiterte in
The German Empire's Holy War turns out to be a grandiose failure. Its professed anti-colonial sentiments weren't credible.
Der Dschihad
Muslims were simply unable to trust a jihad that was led by a Christian power.
nicht glaubhaft.
By November 1918, the war, the most murderous to date, is over. In London and Paris, people celebrate the German defeat. The Kaiser is forced to abdicate. The Muslim revolt that he had hoped for never happened. The victors meet in Versailles to negotiate a new world order. Germany's fate and that of the Middle East are on the agenda. But any pledges made during the war are quickly forgotten. The Arabs no longer have a voice. As Faisal's advisor, Lawrence attempts to influence the negotiations, but he fails. The French and British had secretly agreed to carve up the Ottoman Empire in 1916. In the tradition of the colonial powers, they created new countries with the stroke of a pen. Modern-day Lebanon and Syria are placed under French control. Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine under that of the British.
There are anecdotes, no doubt with some historical truth, that an Englishman and a Frenchman, drunk inside a tent, redrew the demarcation lines of the Middle East with the help of a ruler. The new borderlines had major implications. Tribes and ethnic groups were divided. Geographic divisions were made without any logic. To this day, it makes life in the Middle East extremely difficult.
Faisal had dreamt in vain of a unified Arab kingdom. After the war, in Damascus, he proclaims himself king of Syria. But the French expel him. Then, with permission from Britain, he is able to take over the Iraqi throne in the 1920s. He dies in 1933. The developments following the First World War have left Thomas Edward Lawrence deeply disappointed. He declines all honors and offers of high office. Instead, he writes his account of the Arab revolt. His book, The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, makes him world famous. But the author leads a reclusive life in the south of England. In 1935, Lawrence of Arabia dies in a motorcycle accident at the age of 47. Max von Oppenheim survives his British opponent by many years. The man who organized the Holy War made in Germany had dreamt of a German Islamic alliance. But blinded by his patriotism, he had misjudged reality. Oppenheim has a museum in Berlin for his archaeological discoveries, which he advertises on screen. Because of his connections, the descendant of a prominent Jewish family is left unharmed by Nazi Germany. He dies in 1946.
Max von Oppenheim und T.E. Lawrence waren
Max von Oppenheim and T.E. Lawrence were both patriots and determined imperialists. Both the British and the Germans misused the Arab people for their own imperial ends.
A unified Arabia remains an unfulfilled dream. even though the colonial powers largely pull out of the Middle East in the 1930s and 40s. It's the vision of another key player that becomes reality. Theodor Herzl's dream of a Jewish state begins to take shape after the First World War. Palestine becomes a British mandate. The British agree to support a future Jewish state without impeding the rights of non-Jews. An extremely difficult task. There is opposition against the British and the Jews among the Arab population. The British authorities arrest the heads of the Arab independence movement. The vision of peaceful coexistence between Jews and Arabs in Palestine doesn't come to fruition. In the mid-1930s, civil unrest leads to civil war. The British are caught between the front lines. There is fighting between Jewish and Arab militia. 5,000 Arabs, 400 Jews, and 200 British lose their lives. After World War II, many Holocaust survivors moved to Palestine. The British withdraw, and on the 14th of May 1948, Ben-Gurion declares the independence of the State of Israel. The young country has to fight for its survival. The mass escape and expulsion of many Palestinians and the enmity of a number of Muslim states create a permanent source of friction. Today, the holy city of Jerusalem remains at the center of a conflict, encompassing many political, economic, and religious issues. A hot spot of world politics that could trigger a firestorm at any time.